Happy Friday, friends! It's Sintang Mayumi. I'm back with Halloween cards today. I use Art Impressions Haunted House stamp set. This stamp set is for trifold cards, but I'm using the stamps in individual cards today. I'm using my Stamp Perfect here to stamp the images a few times because my watercolor paper is a little bit textured, so I want to be able to stamp the images a few times. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp the images. The stamp set has 3 scenes and I stamped them individually on watercolor panels. Before we color the images, I'm going to use stencil over the outside part of the stamp images. I'm using web stencil from Tim Holtz, and I secure the stencil with washi tape and add the color with my paddle brush. I also use the tiny brush from the paddle brush set that I have to get to the small spaces, and I use Distress Oxide ink. I use yellow color gouache on the moon because I want it to look bright, and I added a little bit of Pyrrole Orange from my Daniel Smith palette and just blend the colors. And then I colored the rest of the images with my watercolor paints. I'm going to die cut these panels with CC Design Stitch Square Die set, and I use the third to the largest die from the set. I secure the die with washi tape and run it through my die cutting machine. Because the stencil is not wide enough, it didn't cover everything after I die cut the panels. So I just added some hickory smoke ink on the sides, and that looks better. I use pattern paper to go with my images. I will die cut 3 pattern papers with the largest die from Gina Marie Designs Stitch Rectangle die set. I use Halloween papers that I have in my stash, and I have these papers for a long time now, and I'm glad I'm using them. I will also die cut the other pattern papers with the same die. These scraps of pattern papers are 2 inches wide, and I will die cut 2 of them on an angle and die cut the other one straight. After all the die cutting is done, it's time to adhere everything together. I use dry adhesive to adhere the die cut pattern papers on my card base, and my card base are 80-pound Nina textured cardstock. For the sentiment, I use Tim Holtz Monster stamp set and Stampendo's Spooky House stamp set. I'm going to stamp the sentiments with VersaFine Onyx Black ink on scraps of watercolor paper. When I cut my watercolor papers for using panels, I get small scrap pieces, and I don't throw those away. I save them for tiny images, or in this case for sentiments. I emboss the sentiment with clear embossing powder, and I will melt the powder with my heat tool. I also die cut my stamped sentiments with the second to the smallest die from the Stitch Rectangle die set. I secure the die with washi tape and then run it through my Sidekick machine. I temporarily adhere my sentiments on a scratch paper so it doesn't move when I do my ink blending. After I added color on the first sentiment, it doesn't look good to me, so I grab my web stencil again and use it to add more to the sentiment. And I think that's much better. I go back on the first sentiment because the web pattern is not too visible, so I added darker color and I used Black Soot Distress ink and distress the sides of these 2 sentiments with the same ink. And I will adhere these stamp panels on the cards with strong double-sided tape. I also pop up the sentiment with foam tape. I end up not using one of the sentiment because it doesn't fit on one of the cards, so I stamp a smaller sentiment die cut it with stitch ovals, and stencil a web pattern with distress ink. For the inside of the cards, I again used the web stencil and stencil on top of the die cut panels. And then I will add these panels in the inside of the cards with dry adhesive. And lastly, I added shimmer on the pumpkins, on the signs, on the lamp, and on the moon using my Spectrum Nurse Sparkle pen. And my cards are finished. So these are my 3 Halloween cards that I made today. I hope you like today's cards, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye.